Thank you, Solange. This is Elizabeth Pienaar. I'm the project manager for the Pan-African Clinical Trial Registry, and today we will talk about the what, the why, who, how, where, and when of clinical trial registration. Okay. I hope that by the end of this webinar, you'll know the definition of what a clinical trial registry is, and then I'll also try to explain why is there a need for clinical trial registries, and then identify some of the currently available registries, and then we will navigate through how to register a clinical trial. So what is a clinical trial registry? It's a database in which we gather administrative and scientific information about all planned, ongoing, and completed trials with enough information to identify that trials' existence in the world. So why do we register clinical trials? We do that to reduce publication bias and selective reporting of results from clinical trials. There is also the need for people who conduct clinical trials to fulfill their publication mandate. And then furthermore, it allows for transparency and thus enhancing public trust in clinical research. We need to be clear about what we plan to do so that people can see this is what they plan to do, this is what they published, and bring the two together. Registering clinical trials also allows us to reduce the duplication of research, especially in areas where we are working with limited resources. So let's look at the birth of clinical trial registration. In August of 2004, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors proposed prospective registration as a precondition for publishing trial results in any of their member journals. And then in October of that year, the Ministerial Summit on Health Research asked the WHO to establish a network of international registers so that there's a single point of access and the unambiguous identification of all clinical trials. This was seconded later in that year by the World Health Assembly. And then in 2005, the WHO's International Clinical Trial Registry Platform, which we call ICTRP for short, developed out of a project started to set norms and standards for clinical trial registration. And in 2007, the ICMJE updated their statement endorsing that all primary registries who are members of the WHO's network are their registers of choice for registering all clinical trials. Now, we started out saying that we need to reduce publication bias. So you might ask, what is publication bias? The tendency to only publish positive results, and thus if we register our trials, we'll have access to all trial results. But if we only publish our positive results, it's easier to find more results that appear significant because those negative results are not published. And a researcher in 1986 in the Journal of Clinical Oncology already found that there's a significant difference between the findings from published materials and if you look at what is registered at that time that he could find. So publication bias in clinical trial registration. When researchers, sponsors or investigators conceal the presence of selected trials, these studies that are not as significant cannot influence the thinking of patients, clinicians or other researchers, and especially experts who write practice guidelines, as well as those researchers who write systematic reviews. But if all trials are registered in a public repository at their inception, every trial's existence becomes part of the public record and thus can influence our practice guidelines as well as our systematic reviews. So why register? If you want to publish, you have to register your trial. And in 2007, the ICMJE said, publish or register in a WHO primary registry, and they will. It needs to be prospective. And soon after this came out, other journals who are not members of the ICMJE followed this example. So apart from publishing, and there's also the ethical mandate. Clinical trial registration can assist a researcher to fulfill his or her ethical mandate towards participants in a trial. And you might want to ask, but how does this happen? First, what are the ethical imperatives when a trialist needs to consider? And then secondly, we need to look at how can a registry assist us with this? Firstly, a registry provides us with transparency and information dissemination. So everybody knows what's going to happen and people sign a voluntary informed consent to partake in trials. You need to be transparent. And we need to enhance the public trust in the conduct of clinical research. Always bear in mind that any trial that we conduct should serve the public good and should not harm our participants. Having trials in a registry can also increase participant enrollment in research trials, because if they have trust in people being transparent in their research work, they will be able to see what's going on in their specific area of interest and then enroll in trials. An example where information was not being made public and is withheld is this one on this slide. In 2004, a lawsuit brought public attention to the issue of publication bias and selective reporting. GlaxoSmithKline, which is a pharmaceutical company, did not report that there are contraindications of a popular antidepressant in children. The use of this antidepressant in children actually led to suicides in young children. And the efforts to hide the data were reported as such that staff were told to effectively manage the dissemination of data because it was commercially unacceptable to admit that paroxetine, which is the antidepressant, does not work in children. The whole case led to a settlement, and in the settlement, it was said that the GlaxoSmithKline was mandated to publish a registry of all their trials. And at the bottom of the slide, there is a link to the actual publication of more information on this case. So again, this just shows you that we need to be transparent and register our trials to make all information available. So who is responsible for registration? A responsible registrant, as an appropriate representative of the trial's primary sponsor, should ensure that the trial is properly registered. Now, the sponsor is not to have the primary funder, but that person or persons take action the management and or maybe financing of a clinical trial. And it's usually one person assigned to complete registration. And I know that there are institutions where there be one person responsible for registration of all trials conducted within that institution. So what if the type of trials that we need to register is, as WHO defines a clinical trial, any research study that prospectively assigns human participants or groups of humans to one or more health-related intervention to evaluate the effects on health outcomes. This definition includes phase 1 to phase 4 trials, and also interventions are not limited to or restricted to drugs, cells, and other biological products. It also includes surgical procedures, radiological procedures, devices, behavioral treatments, process of care changes, as well as preventative care in patients. A trial should be registered before it starts, and this is known as prospectively registered. That is, register your trial before you start interacting with participants and enrolling them in the study. Some trial registers, including PACTA, allows for an amnesty period of up to 30 days after the initial interaction with participants to prospectively register a trial. More than 30 days after first enrollment, the trial will be registered as retrospective, and then that information will be flagged on the trial that it has been registered retrospective. Bear in mind that there are journals that won't accept a trial for publication if it has been retrospectively registered. So I think we now all know why we need to register retrospectively. So please bear that in mind next time you want to register a trial. So prospective registration, why do we say that? It allows for trials outcome and protocol to be tracked all the way through the course of the trial, and it ensures that the objectives of that specific trial cannot be changed throughout the course of the trial. It captures the intention of the trial right from the outset, without allowing for adjustments of results that might not be favorable to the intervention. And the big outcome of this is that in this way, we know what was planned, then we have the results, it can be compared, and thus we can reduce publication bias. So where do we register? This depends on quite a number of factors. Number one is the institution or the funder. The institution that sponsors the trial or the organization that funds that trial. The country, nation, where you are conducting your trial. There might be specific legislation that you need to conform to. There's also the region in which you are conducting your research. Are you conducting your research in Africa, or are you conducting your research on the Asian continent? And then, what are the publication intentions of the researchers? And I'll show you an example later on why I say the publication intentions of the researcher. So let's, in the next slide, look at the WHO's Clinical Trial Registry platform. This is hosted by WHO. It's not a clinical trial registry per se, but a platform that collects data from partner registries. and it facilitates the prospective registration in these partner registries of a minimum 24-item data set. It tries to harmonize and standardize processes and across all of the member registries. But it provides us with a searchable one-stop portal for all clinical trial registries from many registries. And let's quickly look at the 24-item data set so that you know what information we capture. Here you will see the basic details about a registry. The first one is the number that's provided by the registry in which you are registering your trial. And then countries of recruitment, the health condition or problems that's been studied, the intervention, that will be your experimental group as well as your control group, your key inclusion and exclusion criteria, whether this is a randomized controlled trial or a controlled clinical trial. What was the date of the first enrollment? And this will enable the person who processes the registration to see whether it's a prospective or retrospective registration. And then key primary outcomes as well as secondary outcomes. The following items have been added by the WHO in 2016. We now need to capture information about the ethics review process of a clinical trial, as well as the date on which a trial is completed, or whether the date that you think it will be completed on. And then also, does the researcher have an individual patient data sharing statement? This is only, will you be sharing your individual patient data? This is not the actual individual patient data yet. Yeah. And then once the study has been completed, the researcher needs to enter basic summary results within the register where he or she initially registered the trial. So this WHO's search platform, it has the basic search, and then there's also the advanced search. But let's for now stay with the basic search for this demonstration. In this search, we searched for a plant called Sutherlandia, which is found in South Africa. And you can see that we identified 3 records. And now in the next screen, you will see what an ICTRP record looks like. Here you will see the basic information, but those records all include a URL which will lead back to the original clinical trial registry record. And this is an interventional trial. The study design briefly summarized, country of recruitment, contact details for that specific trial, inclusion criteria. Remember, we mentioned that previously in a slide. This network comes together under the ICTRP at WHO, and it provides us with a forum where the registries can exchange information, work together to establish best practices for clinical trial registration. The registry is composed of primary registries, partner registries, data providers, and then also registries who are currently working with ICTRP towards becoming a primary registry. What we mean by partner registries is you will have maybe a national registry in another African country where they don't have the resources to become a primary registry. They can partner with an existing primary registry, and in that way provide their data through the primary registry to ICTRP. Data providers simply just provide data to ICTRP. The map shows you where the primary registries or more data providing registries are based. One of the data providing registries, namely clinicaltrials.gov, is not a primary registry, whereas all the other primary registries are data providers. So all this information is great. But now, where do we go? Where do you actually submit your trial for registration? So let's navigate through registration. If you are conducting a trial in, for example, South Africa, how do you go about to register? First, you need to think, what is the national legislation or the regional initiative that I need to look at? In South Africa, there's legislation that all clinical trials need to register with the National Clinical Trial Registry in order for them to fulfill that request. Secondly, what are the registration requirements of the person, organization funding my trial? Pharmaceutical companies must register according to their legal imperative, and for most of the US-based companies, this will mean that that trial will need to register with clinicaltrials.gov. And this is also true if you are receiving funding from the National Institutes of Health in the US. You are mandated to register your trial with clinicaltrials.gov. Then third, the question, do either of the above meet the ICMJE requirements? That is the register Sancta and clinicaltrials.gov. If you register with clinicaltrials.gov, they provide data to WHO and is ICMJE approved. The answer is yes. So you are fulfilling publication requirements. If your trial is funded by a local university and you only register with Sancta in South Africa, the answer is no. The WHO primary registry of choice in the African region at the moment is the PanAfrican Clinical Trial Registry, because it's a primary registry with WHO and it conforms to our CMJE requirements. So some history on the Pan-African Clinical Trial Registry. It was launched in September of 2009 after it transitioned from the AIDS, TB and Malaria Registry, which was disease specific, into PACTA, which covers any disease condition on the African continent. Trials must have at least a single recruitment site in Africa to be registered here. So all African researchers can register the trials with the only WHO registry in the region, and in that way, trial data contributes to the global data on clinical trials. And PACTA provides feasible ways for overcoming obstacles to African trialists. If you have difficulty in submitting a trial to PACTA, we're an email away to help you. Registration in PACTA is free, and PACTA is also easy to search and free to access if you want to search it. And I will be demonstrating to you how to search PACTA just now. PACTA provides a resource for understanding and locating current trial activity on the African continent. And also it provides people with means to determine where research is needed. And you can also determine if planned research might not duplicate work that is already in progress. And you can also find appropriate collaborators, and it acts as a networking platform for researchers in the African region as well. And the scaling up of health services can also be assisted by the networking opportunities provided by PACTA. Information translation can also be made more precise and funds saved through the use of PACTA by ensuring that researchers are not duplicating efforts of others. So what we are going to do now is I'm going to move into PACTA to show you what the registry looks like. But before we do that, are there any questions on what we've covered so far? You're welcome to type your questions into the chat box, or you can just ask the question, unmute yourself and then ask a question. Any questions? Okay, there's one question. Okay, the question is, elaborate the networking part of PACTA. Within PACTA, we capture information on principal investigators, as well as people who are already collaborating on research. And what is possible there is that you can find contact information for these persons who might be working in your specific area of interest, and contact to work with them, and hope that answers your question.
Hi, Elizabeth. There's another question from Serena, who's asking, please advise, when does one register a trial after proposals have been received by MCC and regulatory bodies? Elizabeth? Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, yes.
Can I answer this question quickly?
Yeah.
Serena, you can submit your trial for registration to PACTA even if your ethical approval is still pending. You will then enter into the record the date on which you submitted for ethics approval. And then once you have received ethics approval, you come back to the register and you edit the record of your submitted trial to indicate the date on which you have now received your approval, and then also upload a copy of the ethics approval. So I see that you, yes, that will be even register even before you've received MCC or regulatory body approval. Then there's another question here from a person from Egypt, and I'll quickly respond to him. A controlled clinical trial, we've got randomized controlled clinical trials where participants in the trial are randomly allocated to intervention groups. So we've got no control over that. A controlled clinical trial will be where people are simply, they come in and they're given medication A and they give medication B. They're not randomly allocated to their control groups. I hope that answered your question. There's another one. There's a question from Michelle Deru about clinicaltrials.gov being a data provider. The emphasis on registration with clinicaltrials.gov is it is currently the biggest clinical trial register, and it is based in the US. Most of the companies and organizations that provide funding are based in the US, and therefore there is a lot of emphasis on registry. Plus, clinicaltrials.gov will also register observational studies, which the other registries don't. I hope that answered your question, Michelle. That's it. Thank you. There's a question about whether PACTA meet ICMJE standards. Yes, we do. PACTA is a primary registry of the WHO and as such is recognized by them as well as the ICMJE. I know that Nigeria has a national clinical trial registry. Currently, the only WHO recognized registry in Africa is PACTA. Someone wants to register group trial like diagnostic test accuracy trials. We will register that as long as it's a comparative study. Yes, you can register before ethical approval. There's another one, ethical approval. I'm not very clear on this question. Registration can be determined by intention of the researcher. This question is not very clear. If this person could please give us some more information exactly what you mean by this. Usually, as I see this question is, if the researcher wants to publish his or her results, then they need to think, where do I register? Do I simply in South Africa just register with Sancta? Then you won't be able to publish. It's not an acceptable register for publication. Whereas if you register in a WHO recognized registry like PACTA, you will fulfill the ICMJE requirements for publication. Single arm trials are not registered in PACTA. Yes, you are correct. I will try to provide questions and answers with a presentation, yes. In the eastern part of Africa, Kenya has a registry and Uganda has national registries. There are the regional registry at the moment for the whole of the African continent is PACTA. No, PACTA is not overloaded with trial registration from the rest of Africa. Thank you for the concern. At the moment, we are able to handle that, and we look forward to receiving your trials for registration. Regulatory authorities in a country, if they establish a clinical trial registry, they can act as registration bodies if they want to. Let's check the time. I think with our time limitation, I am now going to move us to a demonstration of the Pan-African Clinical Trial Registry. Let me just move this out of the way. I hope you can all see on your screen the home page of the Pan-African Clinical Trial Registry, where you will find a welcome message, as well as somewhere at the bottom where you can fill in feedback to us. That away. And then some links at the bottom. There you will also find our email address as well as telephone numbers with which to contact us. There's an easy way to search a trial. And if you click on this button, it's to register a trial and a map of African trials. If you want to register a trial on PACTA, you need to register as a user. This is so that we can link registered trials to a specific person so that we can contact that person if there are any extra information that we need. And then we also send the registration documentation to the person who has registered the trial. But let's go look at the buttons at the top. Some information about us. There's an information about the history of PACTA, where you can see all the different stages that PACTA went through. And then in 2017, we registered 1,000 trials. Currently, we are approaching 1,600 trials. Come back there, and there's also where you can meet the team that are working on PACTA. You see everybody who's working on PACTA, and then also the unit director of the group, and then PACTA is governed by an advisory group, and the advisory group is there to provide strategic advice and support the working group with regards to the Pan-African Clinical Trial Registry. And that includes people from South Africa as well as international experts on clinical trial registration. Why register? The questions that we've dealt with in the slide presentation, benefits of registering, how do you register, and then some useful links, as well as the terms and conditions of registering with PACTA and of using the register, and some frequently asked questions. PACTA also has, as part of the register, a map which shows Africa, and we will show the recruitment sites across the African continent. And this will explain to those of you who have already registered a trial with PACTA why we ask detailed information about recruitment sites. If I'm, for instance, interested in prevention trials dealing with vaccines, if I choose that, immediately you will see on the right-hand side on the map, there are little green stars. That will be single trial at that location. And now it brings up the information about that trial for me. If I look at another location, say for instance here, let's look at one of these. I can click on that little brown circle, and I will see that I now have 2 trials from Burkina Faso. This one looks at malaria in that specific location. And in that same location, I have another study also on malaria. We can close that. From this record that we have up here now, you are able to go to the full record of that particular trial as it appears within PACTA, and you can scroll through the record. And this was a retrospective registration. There's the eligibility criteria, the inclusion, exclusion, all information about the trial. Where did it receive funding from? Who's the primary sponsor of that study? Who are the people collaborating on that study? And then who's the principal investigator? Where's the principal investigator based? And then the person responsible for public inquiries as well as scientific inquiries. And you will find that there's then the reporting section. This trial was registered before we instituted this. And any changes made to the trial are kept at the bottom of a trial record. It's a full audit trail for each registration. Apart from looking for trials here by simply choosing intervention, one is also able to search for a specific trial. And then you can simply type in a word that appears in the title and then search for it. Now you might ask me, but why do we have 3 locations in the US? Those locations actually form part of a trial which was conducted in Liberia on Ebola, but they also had 3 sites in the US. So this is a multinational, multi-site trial. As long as the trial has a recruitment site in Africa, we will register it on PACTA. Some of you might have searched PACTA in the previous version. I do know that it was not easy, and I'm going to show to you that it's now much easier. There's a basic search in PACTA where you can simply type in a word. If I say malaria, we've now searched for malaria, and you will now find a brief summary of the record. You can either open up this and look at the key information. There you have the scientific title, as well as the brief summary of that specific trial. Or if you're more interested in the full record, you can view the full record. You are also able to download records in a PDF or as an XML file that you can choose. You're able to select only specific records, or you can download all the records that you want to download, which is an improvement on our previous one. There's the advanced search. This gives you a lot of control for what you're looking for. If you are searching for a trial number, you can now enter the trial number. And if you're just simply looking for trials in 2016, you can say PACTA 2016, that's all that you need, and you will get the results for all the trials that were registered in 2016. Let's not do that now and go a bit further. Search term here, anything that appears in the title. What's the intervention that you're interested in? And then you can also, is this a diagnostic intervention? Is it education? Is it vaccine prevention? You choose what type of intervention that you're looking at. Limit your trial to either non-randomized, randomized trials. If you want to see, maybe in malaria, which trials are currently recruiting, you can find that. Trials that are active but they are not yet recruiting, which trials are completed, able to choose a specific recruitment status, and then even disease category. Are you looking at digestive system, genetic diseases, infections and infestations, kidney diseases? So you can see that there's a big choice that you have here. Are you only interested in studies including female participants or male participants or both? And then as well, your age groups, you can select, put in your minimum age, maybe 45. What age type would this be? 45 days or 45 years, if you're interested in that. It is possible to find trials and identify them. Those that have not yet been ethics approved, or those that have been approved. It's possible to search for trials that have been registered between 2 specific dates, trials that have started on a specific date, trials that have been conducted in a specific country. If we, for instance, say Benin, we can look at here you can see that we found 4 records of clinical trials currently registered that are being done in Benin. So let's go back to the search, because there's still some things that I need to show you. The country that the principal investigator is based in. Sometimes people want to know, they know a specific investigator, what trials is this person currently busy with. You can put the person's name in there and find the trials that he or she is working on, as well as the phase of trials. Trials where phase is not, this is not applicable, or maybe which are the phase 2 trials or the phase 4 trials. Are there any questions on the search aspects of PACTA? I think we can take about 2 questions on this now.
There's a few questions on the chat box, Elizabeth.
Yes.
So one is whether you can still register after the study is completed for more than 3 years.
Yes, if a trial has been completed 3 years ago and you register, you need to bear in mind that that study will be registered and flagged as retrospective.
And then there's another
trial entered here, strictly RCTs. Oh, this person does not have audio. A trial mixed with a qualitative study. I think this is the same person without the audio. What is this? How is ethics status perceived if not all affiliated? How is ethics status perceived if not all affiliated ethics committees have provided approval yet? Each ethics committee that you submit an application to, their details are entered separately. So if Committee A have provided ethics approval, that will be indicated. If Committee B has not provided, I think then it will be ethics approval has not yet been fully complied with or received. Any others here? That was the ethics. Particular trial, does it retrieve information for? If you search on Factor, you will retrieve information on all trials registered, whether they still be ongoing, whether they've been completed. All trials will be retrieved. Let's see if there's another one here. If the candidate is planning to register at the institution, currently writing up a protocol, is she allowed to register for a trial? I'm not quite clear on this. If you are writing a protocol for a clinical trial, you are able to submit that protocol for registration in the register, and if it conforms to all requirements, it should be registered. Okay, that one we've answered. Interventions that I mentioned can be drug intervention, any in healthcare intervention, be that drugs, surgery, diagnostics, devices, behavioral, psychosocial, educational, any forms of disease prevention. And a clinical trial, I will take you in the register and I'll show you where you can find the full definitions of clinical trials. Okay, that one we've dealt with ethics. Yes. Are randomized crossover studies also considered as RCTs? Yes, as long as there is a component of randomization. Okay. I quickly want to show you where you can find definitions for clinical trials. In the frequently asked questions, here you will see what is a clinical trial. And if we take that down, there's the WHO's definition of a clinical trial. And then also, how does Factor define clinical trials? A randomized controlled trial is a trial in which participants are randomly allocated to one of two or more intervention arms. Controlled clinical trial are allocated to one or two arms using a method not based on chance. It can be date of birth, a week. Control group is usually given either standardized intervention for that disease or placebo. The next thing is, if you want to register a trial, you first need to register as a user, and you will see when you do that, that there is some information that you need to read through, and please do read this. Because if you click at the bottom, you state that you are the trial's primary sponsor or an authorized representative, and that that trial has not been previously registered on Factor, and that you agree to the above terms and conditions of the register. So you complete this, and then you will be sent a username and a password, which will come to you in an email, giving you your email address as your username, and then your password, which I'm just going to use my own now. You then type in, I hope this works. I'm now logged in, and I can now see trials that have been submitted. So then it's slightly different. You will then be able, I'm unfortunately now logged in as, not as a user. So again, we can search for trials, and you can actually amend your own profile. Just try to get in as a user again. Okay. I see. Sorry, there seems to be a problem now. If you forget your password, you can simply type in here, add your email address, and then reset your password. This will send an email to you with your new login credentials. It's not giving it to me. There it is. We are going to get in right now. Okay, cancel this. Once you've been sent your login credentials, you will be asked to immediately change your password to something that's only known to you. So now I'm logged in as a normal pattern user, which will be the same for all of you. And you will now see, if I click on the button there that says trials, I can look at the trials which I have submitted for registration before.
So Elizabeth, just while you are going there, I realize that our time is just about up.
Yeah, I think questions.
If there are any last key points you want to put across, but it's been wonderful to have everyone here. So it's really great.
It's wonderful because I see that we have people from right across the continent, right up from Cairo to Cape Town, literally Cairo to Cape Town. And I want to say thank you to everyone. If you have any problems or any questions, please do contact us at the email that's on the front page of PACTA. Remember to register your trials prospectively. If you're not sure, contact us and we will help you. We try to respond to any queries that receive as soon as possible. It might take a day or two, but I promise you we will respond to all questions.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And again, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded and we will share it with you via email, the link to the recording of the webinar on Cochrane South Africa's website. I know there are a couple of questions left unanswered, but do contact them and the PACTA group and they will respond to your queries as soon as they can. Thank you very much for attending and thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Pleasure.
Muted. Unmuted.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Elizabeth. Good questions.